welcome. It's time to learn something about terraforming, obviously, since that's in the title and the description, hopefully. And whenever you're terraforming, I'm going to go straight into it, sorry, not really an intro. But whenever you start, it's a good idea to figure out what you're doing. And you see this in a lot of buildings or a lot of terraforming that other people do. And in fact, I have a good example. However, I don't know how good it is actually. I don't know if I can get it, but that's fine. You see this a lot. So many of you may already have seen examples of this. So for example, when you look at a lot of time lapses, including my own, you'll see that I use a lot of cylinders and squares and spheres, and I plan out the general overall shape of the terraform to make sure that I got the general idea right. Because if I like it whenever there's no detail and a very bad shape, well, not very defined shape, if I still like it, it's going to turn out good in the end, which I consider to be a pretty good thing, because that means that I'm going to like it when I'm done, as I said. So it saves you a lot of time having to restart, because I restart if I don't like something. So a good example of this would be doing if you're planning out a curve, you can use squares to plan out your curve and just adjust it as you go along. So like this here. There we go. I sort of like this. There we go. Of course, that was not a best example of using a square to make a curve, but you can use curves to get a general idea of what you want your curves to look like. I'm gonna extend it a little bit. There we go. That's a little bit better. So you can use squares and other things to plan out your curves, which I consider it to be very helpful, and I would recommend everyone to do this technique. It's just extremely helpful, as I said. And you could do that with a lot of other types of terraforming, and you could use only straight lines to plan out your terraforming. And you see that a lot whenever you're on Java, especially when you're on Java, because you don't need a terraform you don't need a wireframe as much, but this is more of a wireframing tutorial, and I may do a more the other kind is more of a sculpting technique. But even if you're on Java and you don't wireframe, I would still recommend watching this and practicing your wireframing, because it will help you in the end learn how to sculpt better, actually. So even if you use World Edit, it's still going to help you build better watching this video. At least in my opinion, I think it'll help you build better. It depends on how good I can make the video. So this right here is an example of what I call a 3D line, and the reason why I say that is because it's changing all three of the numbers on the coordinates. So as you can see, you're going up and turning at the same time. So this is like a 3D curve, so it curves around. And doing lines like this is not exactly very easy, and I'll be explaining some of that using those things over there. But whenever you're terraforming, you can almost terraform everything using only 2D lines. However, the issue is whenever you have a part of a mountain like this here, let's say this extends out and it's a little bit extreme compared to the other ones, and it's like I call it a vein, I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's like an extension off the mountain a little bit. If you're trying to terraform that only using these 2D lines, it's not going to be very easy. So you just wireframe it using 3D, and you smooth it out after you get your 2D lines in there. So an example would be going down here and then curving it back up. So there we go. So that's what you'd have to do, but you'd have to do that a lot with many 2D lines. So that's why I would recommend learning how to do 3D lines. But first, I would recommend learning how to do these 3D lines, because these 3D lines are much more difficult than the 2D lines. So you need to learn how to do the 2D lines, and I'll help you learn how to do the 3D lines as you go. And you'll just be able to do it instantly. You don't have to think about it very hard, which is another important thing, because whenever you're building, you shouldn't be thinking about every individual line unless you're beginning. Whenever you're a beginner, then obviously you're not going to be able to build just 2D lines very easily, or 2D curves. So you need to practice it and learn how to do that kind of stuff. And once you learn how, then it will help you figure out how to do a lot of the other stuff as you go along. So whenever you begin, you may need to think about how the 2D lines look. But the more you terraform, the better you'll become, and the quicker you can do it. It's sort of like the kind of muscle memory you have whenever you learn how to draw. When you learn how to draw, you can just instantly draw a straight line or a curved line, and you can do it with the pressure and the angle correctly. That's why I say muscle memory, but it's not exactly muscle memory, but it's like how you use a pencil, which I consider to be muscle memory, but some people can argue it differently because you're not moving very many muscles, but it still is muscle memory in my opinion. So having these 3D wireframes is extremely helpful for defining the shape. Recommend trying to do it, but also using a lot of 2D lines, because you don't have to connect this area up with a 2D line, a 3D line. You could easily just connect it up with a 3D line that's just curved back inwards, just how that one is. And just have several of those going over and over again. And you can create like these little square patterns. I say square patterns because there's a square or a rectangle there, a square rectangle there. Same way with this. This is like a square or a rectangle. But I want to connect this up better. Here we go. That's better. And then with these lines, if you have enough of them, you can use it to fill in between the areas. So for example, where is that? It's way up there. Can you go up? Go up a lot higher. There we go. So whenever you have areas like this, one of the difficulties is connecting up, let's say this area up there down to this area and making it look smooth. Well, actually that's not the difficult part, but like filling this in and then connecting these other areas that you're going to fill in too. So for example, if I fill this in and then I smooth this out and I make this look really nice and curved and I make it look nice, then here, let me get this right first and fill some of this in. And sorry I'm not talking a lot, but I'm just trying to fill some of this in so I have an example. So we have this line right here that I made. So whenever I fill this section in over here, which I'm want to try hurrying it up and spamming it a little bit, smooth it out. And here we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so in between these two areas, there's a bit of a issue that like whenever you have like a terraform line like this, it's not going to match up with your fill-in sometimes. And like trying to connect this up to that spot, you need to also smooth it out in between those two squares. So you can't just have those two squares, fill them in, and then expect it to be done. You actually have to fill in those two squares and smooth them out in between so they actually look like they're connected rather than seeming like they're very disconnected. So that's why you have to go back over it slightly and fill in the rest of it and fix some of the issues that are caused by the how it's curved and how it goes around and stuff. So it's not just filling it in, it's filling it in, then filling in a second piece and then smoothing it out along with that. So it can be sort of irritating to have to do that every single time, but it's something you do need to do. And that's something that I got from like sort of a tip from ZSlowZ, which is a really good terraformer that I know. And I asked him what is one of the main difficulties of terraforming, or for him at least. And one of the irritating parts for him was filling in different pieces of these squares, which for him were massive. So his were much, much larger. However, it's the same kind of thing that can happen, especially with large sections. Like filling in an entire section like this and then having to fill in an entire section like that. You have to smooth it out in between and make sure they look proper together. I'm not explaining it as good as he probably could. However, it's something that I would recommend definitely thinking about whenever after you get done filling in an area. Don't just remember that you have some more to do after you fill it in. To smooth it out between hand, which you can smooth out between hand while filling it in a little bit. So that's something you could learn how to do a little bit, but just keep that in mind. And we'll fill in this last section right here, and then I'm going to get into more with 3D lines. 2D lines are pretty easy, but it's one of the main difficulties of 2D lines is learning how to build curves, which, like for myself, whenever I'm terraforming, I can terraform curves quite easily. Like, it's just something that's quite natural for me because I've been doing it for a pretty decent amount of time, so building a curve isn't that difficult for myself. well, at least things that seem curved whenever you look at them. And it's just going to take experience. It's like learning how to spell. Okay, here's an example. Terraforming is like writing the sentence "I like apples." You know, you don't realize that there's a lot of things that go into writing the sentence "I like apples." First, you have to let me get a sign out so I have at least some sort of visual representation of what I'm saying. So with this, if I write "I like apples," there's a lot to it actually. Like if you think about it like a toddler, this is how it's going to be like for you whenever you're learning how to terraform, if you're a beginner at least. And even if you know how to terraform, this is a good concept to know for why a lot of people don't know how to do certain things or don't understand certain concepts you're trying to explain to them. So whenever you're a toddler, you can't read "I like apples." All you can read in there is that there's lines and curves. There's like just a bunch of lines and circles and dots. You know, you see those, but you don't see the letters. You don't see, like, you see them grouped together, like the word "like." You know, that's a grouping of lines and dots. But then apples, you know, that's a grouping of lines and dots, and that's just some lines. That's all you see as a toddler or someone who's just starting to learn the alphabet. Then whenever you're a toddler, you're like that. You have to focus on just the lines, and you learn how to write each letter. You have to focus on the lines. Well, like the letter A is 3 lines. And you have to think about it, okay, the letter A is this. And you have to memorize it well enough that you could start reading stuff. So whenever you just learn the alphabet, this is what you see. I space L-I-K-E space A-P-P-L-E-S, or, you know, period, or dot. And that's what you see whenever you just learn how the alphabet. And that's exactly sort of what happens with the wireframing. Whenever you just begin, all you see is the lines and the curves, and you don't see the overall shape as much. And then whenever you start learning how to put together these words, whatever, there we go. Whenever you start learning how to put together these words, now you see "I like" and apples. So now you know how to write words. You're seeing "I like" and apples. You're seeing each individual word rather than the entire phrase. It's not a sentence, it's a phrase, sorry. And with this phrase, you know, after you become more experienced, you start seeing "I like apples" as one thing, just one phrase. Now, I've been going on about this for probably too long. However, that's not exactly important, but I think it really helps to understand how not really terraforming works, but how learning works. I mean, how can you expect yourself to be a professional builder after just 1 week of terraforming when it's taken you, if you're my age, it's taken you 16 years to learn how to write essays properly, or more properly than you used to? So I mean, even whenever you're in college, you're still learning you're still expanding upon what you learned in kindergarten. You're learning how to write better essays and stuff like that. Like, you start out in kindergarten and you're still working on stuff that you learned in kindergarten. You're still working on it now in school, which is crazy if you think about it. You've been working on that for years. It's the same subject. It's very, very similar to whenever you're trying to learn how to terraform. You have to start with the basics, learn those really well, and expand upon it so that you don't have to think about the curves anymore. You don't have to think about the lines. You can start worrying about the general overall shape, and then after you learn how to do all that kind of stuff better, you can worry about the color, the texture, the composition, and a bunch of other more advanced techniques. And now I'm going to explain 3D lines. This is one thing I think can be quite difficult when it comes to wireframing and learning how to build, is the oddities of 3D lines. Now, it's actually not that difficult, so don't worry. But this is a normal cube. This is a diagonal cube. And this is a 2 diagonal cube, and this is a 3 diagonal cube. However, I want to explain sort of a math concept, and this may be a little bit hard to understand, but if you ever had a pre-algebra class, or an algebra class, or a geometry class, or any of those kinds of classes, then you know this. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. It's Pythagorean theorem. I'm not going to explain it, but I want to tell you that, not really tell you, but just by looking at it, if you look at this right here, and you look at this, those two are the same distance. But the corner from here to here is much longer than these two sides. Not much longer, but it is longer than those two sides. but shorter than those two put together, if you know what I mean. So, oh, sorry, there we go. So this block from one side of the block to the other side of the block is roughly 1.4 blocks. Oh, sorry, I keep hitting stuff. But it's roughly 1.4 blocks. And whenever you have this here, it's even further. So this is roughly 1.7 blocks because it's 1.4 and 1. So it's slightly bigger. So 1 from here to here, from that corner to that corner, is roughly 1.7 blocks. So if you're wireframing something and you build something like this, which as you can see, it has that look to it, which is quite nice. It has this up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1 kind of look to it, which is what it's supposed to look like. But whenever you wireframe it, it has up 1, up 1 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, because it's missing a block. So you have to add in those blocks afterwards, which is more like this. So it's because whenever you build something at diagonal, there will be blocks missing, which is something that can be very irritating when you're trying to figure out how to build a cube like this. Now, obviously, you're not going to use there's not a lot of builds where you actually need to use these diagonal cubes, but it's something that you sort of do need to learn, because if you're trying to build a organic, you definitely need to know how to do this. So that is something that can be a little bit irritating, is those kinds of issues when building with cubes of missing blocks because of how the diagonals work, because 1.7 blocks from here to here to here to there, you're basically missing an entire block right here, or part of a block at least. So you actually do need to add in that afterwards, even though it doesn't seem like you should. So that can be sort of a weird phenomenon that will happen, and that's one reason why these can be extra difficult, is because of the oddities of how they certain sides will be longer. So the side that's the most diagonal, let's say this is 1.7 that way, 1.7, 1.7, 1.7, 1.7, but this, it's 1.7 from here to there, 1.7 here to there, but it's only 1.4 from here to there, and then it's 1.7 again, 1.4, so the distance is completely different. So to make this like a cube right here is quite difficult, and to get the right angle using blocks is something else that can be quite difficult. And then also when you have the angles change, because with a circle the angles change, well, sort of, depends on how you look at it. Trying to build this at a diagonal can be very difficult because it will look like it's an oval because of how the distance will change, which I was going to build an example of that, but that's something that you should understand. And actually I'll do a very, very small example. I'll just do one of these here. Very, very basic circle. In fact, I don't even think this is a proper circle in my opinion, but this will have to do for now. So here we go. And a very, very small circle, which it's not actually a circle how I explained, because, you know, it's diagonal, so it's going to be messed up. So from up here, it's a circle. From down here, it's an oval. So if you actually want this to be a circle, you have to move things like this. For example, move that inward. You have to move this a block inward, which this is probably going to end up being wrong actually, because I don't build a lot of these. But basically you just have to keep editing it. It's a little bit better. Move this forward, 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 this forward. Move. Let's see, what else can I move forward? Okay, it got that part. Can I, what else did I move forward? Can't even keep track of what I'm doing anymore. What did I do to this? I think I moved this forward. I can't even tell anymore. But yeah, that's a little bit better. And then, you know, you just keep having to adjust it one thing at a time until you actually get it to sort of look like a diagonal circle, which takes a lot of time. And then from the top, it will look like an oval, which is actually sort of what it's supposed to look like. Because if you've ever seen a circle that's at a diagonal, then you'll know that from up top, it looks like a diagonal, but from down below it doesn't. Which I messed this up. How from up here, there we go, it looks like an oval. From the other side, it looks more like a circle. So that's something that you do have to sort of keep in mind, and I hope that was a good example. I'm pretty much done. I may or may not do a time-lapse after this. I guess we'll find out after I get done. Have a great, wonderful, sublime, and fantastic, majestic day, and God bless.